All right, hi everybody. My name is Miss Brezick for those of you who don't know me. And the purpose of this video is to do a demonstration about looking at poetry and doing some poetry analysis by close reading through different lenses. So I'm going to share my screen for most of the time as I talk with you and go over some work. So I know that earlier this week you had done this poetry vocabulary here. So if you are up to date on all of your assignments, you should, have already some background knowledge on this. But I wanted to kind of organize that language for you, all of that vocabulary into categories that might make it simpler for you to see how you might want to look at poetry. So we know that poetry is different than, a novel or nonfiction because it has a different structure. There's a lot of white space on the page and it's written in lines and stanzas. Sometimes it's pattern rhymes, other times it's free verse. Poetry also does a really great job with imagery. And underneath the imagery, you can see a ton of figurative language types that poets use in order to create images for their readers. Poetry also uses sound or rhythm, like what you see below, in order to make the poem sound a certain way. And poetry typically has pretty strong emotion packaged up in a small box. So today we are going to go over this poem, Long Live Langston, which you read earlier this week or yesterday from Bronx Masquerade. And the purpose is today I want to show you how to close read a poem through a few different lenses. So the focus of the lenses that we're going to do today is we're going to have one read just to kind of orient ourselves to the text. Then on the second read, we're going to look at how the author uses rhythm, and we're going to specifically look for some alliteration in this poem and any sounds that the author is using to create good poetry. We're also going to focus on imagery for the third read and specifically allusion. So we're going to be talking about imagery and allusion. So I didn't make a slide for this, but just so you're aware, an allusion is something, it's like a word, but it has like this other meaning, right? So if you think about like inside jokes your friends have, this actually just happened to me last week where one of my friends posted this beautiful Facebook message, and then within it there was this line, "You are the smartest girl I know." And that is an inside joke in our friend group that is alluding to something different. So today, as we read this poem by Wesley Boone called Long Live Langston, we're going to be looking for things that are alluding to other things, okay? So in order to get started with this close reading in different lenses, the first thing we have to do is just kind of read through the text. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you like what my initial thinking is about this, okay? So this is Long Live Langston by Wesley Boone. Trumpeter of Lennox and Seventh, though Jesse B. Semple, you simply celebrated blues and bebop and being black before it was considered hip. You dipped into the muddy waters of the Harlem River and you shouted, "Taste and see that we black folk be good at fanning hope and stoking the fires of dreams deferred." You made sure the word heard about the beauty of maple sugar children and the artfully tattooed backs of black sailors venturing out to foreign places. Your sweet flypaper of life let us pass the Apollo and on through 125th and all the other Harlem streets you knew like the black of your hand. You were a Pied Piper, brother man, with poetry as your flute. It's my honor and pleasure to salute you, a true Renaissance man of Harlem. Okay, so I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes I get a new poem and I read it and like I'm saying all the words, but I'm like, I have no idea what this means. So like my initial comprehension is feeling really confused. Okay, so we'll just keep it basic and simple, and then we'll see what we can do by doing a couple more reads of this. So close reading, the purpose isn't just to be like, oh, all of you kids read this a whole bunch of times. The purpose is to uncover meaning, and we do that by reading a few times. So the first thing on my first lens, actually even before I get to my first lens, I'm just gonna kind of scan through and I'm gonna highlight some things that I'm like wondering about. So here, this Jesse B. Semple, I'm just gonna change the color, not really sure about that. I really like this part right here, blues and bebop and being black before it was considered hip. I'm thinking about this because I can hear some sound in that, and I'm thinking of alliteration right away, right? We can see that, so we'll just hold that off for a second. Going on down a little bit more, this whole thing, stoking the fires of dreams deferred. I'm not exactly sure what this is, but I think it could be something, so I'm going to highlight it. Coming down, you made sure the world heard about the beauty of maple sugar children and the artfully tattooed backs of the black sailors venturing out to foreign places. There's some stuff going on here, so we're gonna highlight, save for later. And then your sweet flypaper of life. Notice how all these words are capitalized. That's gotta be something. I'm gonna highlight. And then another part that I liked that kind of jumped out at me, through 125th and all the other Harlem streets, you knew like the black of your hand. Have you guys ever heard that expression, to know something like the back of your hand? So I don't know, I'm gonna highlight that. Now, there are certainly other things. Lennox and 7th up at top probably is something. Taste and see, that's something. So as you can see, I'm gonna show you a few things, but there's definitely more that you could go on that would help with comprehension as well. Okay, so why don't we start figuring out some of this stuff? So Jessie B. Simple. So I'm gonna go over to Google and I'm gonna put in Jessie B. Simple poem. As you can see, I've been preparing for my lesson. And let's see what we find. Jessie B. Simple is still here. In my time, I've been cut, stabbed, run over, hit by a car, so blah, 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 blah. Langston Hughes Poetry Foundation. Okay, so we know that this poem is called Long Live Langston, so we see that there's a relationship here. Jessie B. Simple and the Narrative Art of Langston. Best of Simple. Let's see, where should I, let's see what this guy is. All right, so there's a comic there. Not really sure. Let's see what the Poetry Foundation says. Okay, and in the convenience of time, I'm just gonna do a command find and put Jessie B. Simple. Okay, here. Hughes reached many people through his popular fictional character, Jessie B. Simple, shortened to Simple. Simple is a poor man who lives in Harlem, a kind of comic no good, a stereotype Hughes turned to advantage. He tells the stories to Boy to foil the stories, and then as a writer must like Hughes. So that other website that we saw seems like Langston was doing some comic work and was using this character. So all I'm gonna do for right now is I'm just gonna take this link and I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna highlight and just leave that there. Okay, blues and bebop. Okay, we already said that we're gonna save that. Let's see what we don't know still. Dreams deferred. Let's come back over here to Google and check on dreams deferred. Oh, and see reference. Maybe that's, another way to say allusion, to reference something. Harlem by Langston Hughes. Oops, I don't want to go on that one. Okay, so here's a poem called Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun or fester like a sore? And then does it run? Okay, so this is obviously a poem by Langston Hughes. And here it is in what happens to a dream deferred. So we can see on our poem, this poem was written by Wesley Boone, who's a character in Bronx Masquerade. It's about Langston Hughes, and here he is referencing or alluding to a poem. So we're just gonna link that up. Let's go with the sweet flypaper of life. So when I did that originally, I was thinking like, does everyone know what a flypaper is? So if I come on here and put flypaper, just so we all kind of have this visual. right? This is disgusting. So I won't stay on here very long, but this is that sticky fly paper. When there's a lot of flies, you hang it up and it catches flies. So my original thought when I was reading this poem is, your sweet fly paper of life, let us pass the Apollo and on through 125th. Now, I was talking with all of the 8th grade teachers and I'm like, oh, that's really good imagery. It's like, maybe it's like his poems are like drawing people and causing them to stick. But then another teacher said, well, it's all capitalized, so maybe it's something else too. So let's put sweet fly paper of life, Langston Hughes. And go back over here. The Sweet Fly Paper of Life by Roy de Carava and Langston Hughes. Looks like it's some kind of poem. This side is probably describing it. Maybe this is it here, but we can see that, you know, it sounds like this is another poem that he wrote. So you notice here I'm seeing Amazon.com. I'm not clicking there because I'm just trying to like weed out some of these. Sweet Fly Paper of Life signed. Maybe it's part of a book or something. Not really sure. Okay, so let's just move on so I can try to keep this video short. Okay, so my first lens, what I was working on is finding meaning of what's confusing. Okay? Now, when you do poetry, it's like before you can really get to allusions, you have to know like what the terms and what the poem is saying. So even though I can read all of the words on here, I didn't know who Jessie B. Semple was until I did a Google search. So the first thing you kind of have to do with poetry is you have to kind of uncover some meaning. Now the second lens, I want to focus on rhythm. And so we already kind of talked about this one. I'm going to change this color here for rhythm to blue. Blues and bebop and being black before it was considered hip. We can hear there's a lot of alliteration there. So I'm just going to make a note. And then it's like, why would the author do this? So the goal of poetry isn't to be like, oh, there's alliteration. But it's like, why? Well, blues and bebop, those are music and it sounds kind of musical there. And being black before it was considered hip. You can see how it just creates this feeling because of the sound it's playing with and because of the rhythm. So we have some alliteration there. One other place where I noticed some sound, and it could be as simple as this. Okay, you dipped into the muddy waters of the Harlem River and shouted, taste and see, that we black folk be good at fanning hope and stoking the fire. Notice how the endings of these two words right here, coming in back to back, they have similar endings. And that's another like sound thing, right? Oh no, I'm gonna mess this up here. Okay, so we have a little bit more of some sound going on. So these are things that as you read poetry that you're gonna wanna notice. So we did find some alliteration. And then we found some sound play. Now, I'm not saying this is all. Surely when you finish watching this video, you can look back, perhaps you'll find some more. But notice I'm keeping those in blue. Now let's go off to the third lens and let's look at imagery and allusion. Remember, to allude to something is to reference something. So now that we've read a little bit about the Harlem Renaissance, you know, we found out that it was a time when Black folks were like coming into their own. They were sharing their music and their culture. And obviously there was a lot of different pressures than we feel today. You know, some of it may be still consistent, but it was certainly a different time. So Long Live Langston, maybe Wesley is saying, trumpeter of Lennox and Seventh, through Jessie B. Semple, you simply celebrated blues and bebop. So if those comics that we saw about Jessie B. Semple, if those comics were showing people like about the culture of the Black community, he's basically saying, you celebrated our culture through this comic. So he's alluding to this comic The author of this poem doesn't tell the reader who Jessie B. Semple is. We figured that out, and it alluded to the fact that Langston is giving out information about Jessie B. Semple in that way. So I'm gonna color this one. I don't know if it'll change because it's a hyperlink now. I don't know where my highlight tool is. I'm working on PowerPoint. I had some issues in Google Slides, so maybe I'll just bold or something here. So we have some allusion with Jessie B. Semple. And then the other one I wanted to talk about, just because I don't want this video to go on for too long, is this part about you made sure the world heard about the beauty of maple sugar children. You know, he could have just said, like, if we think about maple sugar or maple syrup, are you getting a color and an image in your head? He could have just said Black children, but he used different words to allude to maybe even a softer color right there, but you can see how that is imagery, maple sugar children. And the artfully tattooed backs of Black sailors venturing out to foreign places. So think about the history that you know about Black people maybe coming over, and the tattooed backs. Are they talking about a tattoo here? I don't think so, right? If we think about history and what we know about slavery, perhaps this is just another part of imagery that, you know, makes us picture something to make a point, right? So poetry's cool because it's like a little puzzle that you have to solve and uncover things to figure it out. So you can kind of see how I've gone through. I read first, feeling pretty confused. Then I had a lens of uncovering information. So I'm searching for things I don't know. I'm Googling things, I'm getting information. Then I was looking at through the lens of rhythm. I found some alliteration and some sound play. Then I looked specifically at imagery. I showed you one example of allusion. This Pied Piper, I don't know if you have ever heard of this from just, you know, oops, my search engine is messed up, hang on. Pied Piper. All right, so the Pied Piper of Hamelin, I'm not gonna open up the link, but basically it was maybe some fable or some folklore of this guy who had a little flute and he sang, and I don't know, it was like rats or some animals that would like come following along with him. So if we Google that, an allusion to the Pied Piper to create an image for us, so we can now reread with that information. Your sweet flypaper of life led us past the Apollo and on through 125th and all the other Harlem streets you knew like the black of your hand. You were the Pied Piper, brother man, with poetry as your flute. Okay, so Langston Hughes doesn't have a flute, but he has poetry, and he's perhaps drawing people out and calling to them to say follow by that. So now that I've gone through and I've done all of this digging and researching and searching, I'm not gonna read it to you again, but I would say that my ending comprehension after I went through and read one or two more times perhaps would be a celebration of Black life in the Harlem Renaissance or something like that. So the goal of poetry study, sorry, hard to multitask, to talk about something else and write something else. I'm, you know, human just like you guys. So the goal of poetry is just to do some close reading, look through different lenses with the purpose of gaining more comprehension. So as we go through Bronx Masquerade, we're gonna be asking you to look through various poetry lenses. And sometimes there'll be alliterations, but sometimes there won't. And maybe there's metaphors and sometimes there won't. That's kind of, as the reader, how we get to work to uncover that. So I hope this was helpful. Please provide feedback to your teachers, and looking forward to doing this again with you guys. And I'm going to hopefully end this now, if I can. Yeah, so that's it, bye.